Number 5 on my list of common mistakes that so many shops make that you don't have to make is print head pitch adjustment. What's that? Well, you'll see here on a press that I have, we have a channel clamp. That's the part of your press you put the screen into. Okay, that's the channel clamp. Screen goes in there. And behind that channel clamp is what's known as a backing plate. Those are bolted together. That's the way the whole industry operated for years. And then there was a battle between two screen printing manufacturers. One guy stole the design of the other, basically. And the guy who appropriated the design was making the machines offshore, where you don't have to pay workers' compensation, health care. In fact, the people making the machines were in a prison, so there's no labor expense. And this foreign country can ship products into the United States with no import tax. So the foreign company has all kinds of cost advantages over the American company that's paying its taxes. And in fact, the company doing the importing was selling their presses at about half the price as the US manufacturer, and the two machines looked identical because they're made off the same blueprints. Nice, right? So there was a vendetta between these two companies, one hating the other, and it wasn't enough that in their hate that they had a product that was half the cost. It was cheap quality too, by the way, compared to the US manufacturer. But that wasn't enough. They really wanted to stick it to the manufacturer, so they came up with this idea of a pitch adjustment on the screen head. And what's that all about? Well, most printers, certainly in the old days and even today, will put their positives on the platen, which means you, of course, will have to clean the platen up. I don't like doing that, but that's how they do it. And then they bring the screen down, shuffle the screen around until the screen matches the positive, and then they tighten up the screen in the press. Okay? Now, the way to get the best registration of colors, so colors but register and so forth, is to have the screen on contact with the positive. But when you go to print, the best printing is what's known as off contact. Off contact is achieved by turning the off contact bolt. But that's back here on the color arm. What it does, it creates a pitch in the screen. So the screen is no longer parallel to the platen. And that's a problem because it messes up your color registration, and if you have micro registration, it defeats micro. So these folks who are importing the machines decide, aha, we have a good idea. What we'll do is we'll put a pitch adjustment in the head. So we're going to separate the channel clamp from the backing plate, and it'll be a threaded connection, and you can rotate that connection. And so in theory, you can correct for the pitch that you've created with the off contact by adjusting between the channel clamp and the backing plate. When I first saw that at a trade show, I came home and told our crew, we're going to duplicate that and see if it's a good idea. We found out it's the worst abortion imposed on the screen printing industry ever. Because number one, you'll never get them exactly right. Number two, when you turn these off contact bolts, they're very sensitive. It's a very sensitive adjustment. We tell our customers, never touch those bolts. If you do, the screen printing gods are coming after you. And in fact, when we put those bolts in there, either the point of the bolt or the flat spot must be facing forward. Why two? Because when bolts are made, the threads are started at two locations. And depending on which thread we pick up when we put the bolt in there, we end up with either the flat spot of the bolt facing us or the point of a hex-headed bolt. It's that sensitive. And if you're off, if you're supposed to be on the point and you're on the flat spot, or you're halfway between, then the screen is not going to be parallel. How do we know? We use 1/8 inch plexiglass, and we bring the screen down. The screen is flush on the plexiglass. Of course, the plexiglass is going to be resting on our adhesive, so the plexiglass is not going to move. And we put our positives on top of the plexiglass, so we're always putting positives on a nice clean surface. We're not messing up our positives. And so now we've got the screen flush on here, and the color arm is resting on that off contact bolt that we never touch. And when we pull out the plexiglass and bring the screen down, the color arm is going to rest on the off contact bolt. The screen will be above the platen by the thickness of the plexiglass, 1/8 of an inch. So we never get involved with adjusting. And the other thing about this is you're holding the screen out here, raising it up and down. Those threaded connections are about halfway between the pivot point of your machine and where you're holding. And that is the weakest point of the structure, is the center. That's where you get the greatest deflection. And here we are working that weak spot, which is a threaded connection. That's a registration problem. Your head's going to move. You're losing quality by introducing that. The other thing is that on a multi-color press, like a floor model, say you have a 6-color. So you have to go around and change all 6 of those off-contact bolts. And when people turn them, they don't turn them all exactly alike. So the pitch of one arm is different than the pitch of the next arm. Then when you rotate the color arms, you're coming into a different pitch. Forget micro-registration. And that is a disaster. And then when you go to reset this, which you should do, first of all, you're spending time walking around the press, turning it, and when the job's over, walking around the press, presumably going back to 0. That's a waste of time. You're not getting pieces per hour, which is the bottom line in this business, and you'll never get it right. So, and proof is, if you start using 1/8 inch plexiglass, you're going to see how critical the connection is, that you have to have the plexiglass, you have to have a tight screen, they must be parallel, and you don't have to deal with any of that monkeying around business with this pitch adjustment. And the unfortunate thing was, when this one company introduced this pitch adjustment, the competitor they were trying to push out of business, and successfully contributed to that guy going out of business. And it was a very fine name that went out of business, but that guy copied also. And when those two guys were doing it, other people who manufacture equipment who also don't print and don't get it, they adopted that print head pitch adjustment, because prospective customers would think there's something deficient in their equipment that they don't have this feature, not realizing the true cost of that feature. So all the companies have it, and if you have a machine that has that, I would say level up your head, and then you lock up these heads so that there can be absolutely no movement between the channel clamp and the backing plate. Get rid of it. It's bad news. It's one more on my list. So let's go to the next one. This is such fun.